She solved 286 murders.
I'm nosy.
And helped commit even more.
Just the thought of it's enough to make you sick.
She spoke to ghosts. She captured a unicorn. She plotted a secret takeover of the US government.
You are to shoot the presidential nominee through the head.
You may know Angela Lansbury as a sexy seductress from her early film roles.
Mother says I mustn't.
Or as a scheming villainess.
There's no way of proving that I killed Joe.
Or from her most popular role as the sweet grandmotherly Jessica Fletcher from Murder, She Wrote.
I'm simply a mystery writer from Cabot Cove, Maine.
Cabot Cove, nice touch, has a real ring of truth about it.
But in real life, Dame Angela's life has been nearly as tumultuous as those of her characters. From fleeing the Nazis as a child, to marrying young only to discover her husband was gay, to rescuing her cat from a fire and her children from a gang of serial killers, to proudly accepting her status as a gay icon, Angela Lansbury lived a nearly century-long life of adventure, upheaval, and constant reinvention. Hey, I'm Matt, I make videos about pop culture, and this is the story of Angela Lansbury like you have never seen her before.
How'd you like to spoon with me?
Angela was born in London on October 16, 1925, the daughter of an Irish actress named Moyna McGill and Edgar Lansbury, a mayor, suffragette, and lifelong communist. She was the second of 4 siblings, and young Angela grew up surrounded by arts and culture from her mother and politics from her father. Her mother, Moyna, would host lavish salons at their homes, inviting actors and artists. Angela recalled, "I was quite used to seeing glorious red-headed ladies with enormous bosoms lying on our couches being painted." Her father and grandfather, meanwhile, would take Angela to political rallies around London, and she'd watch them give speeches about social justice, workers' rights, and extending votes to women. From an early age, Angela's parents instilled in her an appreciation for the arts and also a sense of integrity and looking out for those in need. With each foot in 2 very different worlds, Angela initially planned to follow her father's footsteps and go into politics. But then, tragedy struck. When she was 9 years old, her father passed away. Angela was heartbroken. She'd lost one of the most important figures in her life, a leader who'd helped her establish her own moral compass. His death also left the family in a dire situation. This was the 1930s, and her mother Moyna was now a single woman with 4 children. Acting work was getting harder to come by, money was running out for the family, and with her mother struggling to support them, it was up to Angela, not even yet a teenager, to take care of her siblings. Today, we tend to recognize Angela Lansbury for playing older characters, but even back then, she said, "I was an old lady at 10. When my father died, I became the partner with my mother in bringing up my brothers. I had to grow up fast." As she mourned the death of her father, Angela discovered an escape from her grief: acting. At first, it was just something she did as a distraction from her sadness. When she rode the bus through London, she'd adopt different personas, acting like she was a famous film star or a gangster's girlfriend. Moyna noticed that her daughter had a talent for playing characters and started coaching her. She taught Angela a few songs, and the next thing she knew, her now 12-year-old daughter had created an entire song and dance routine to entertain the family and friends. Seeing how happy acting made her, Moyna managed to scrape together some money and sent Angela to a dramatic art school in London. It was there that she started to hone her knack for performing. She also made friends with another aspiring actress around the same age, Glynis Johns, who would go on to play the mom in Mary Poppins and also reunite to work with Angela again half a century later. Still just a teenager, Angela's career was starting to take shape. She dreamed of one day becoming a star. But this was a dangerous time to be in London. By the time Angela was 14, World War II had broken out, and Germany had launched a bombing campaign over England. Moyna sent her 2 youngest kids to live in the country, an arrangement that was common at the time and coincidentally appears decades later in the movie Bedknobs and Broomsticks. And she found work driving an ambulance and saving the lives of Londoners during bombing raids. Moyna told Angela, "You can either go to the country to get away from the bombs, or you can stay here." And Angela stayed. But by the fall of 1940, the bombings had become so bad that Moyna was desperate to get her family out of the country. She secured passage on a ship, what turned out to be the last one to leave England before a German blockade, and the family made their way to New York City. Refugees weren't allowed to bring much with them, including money, and the Lansburys had virtually nothing to their name when they arrived in New York. They had to start their lives over completely from scratch. The family settled in Greenwich Village, surrounded by bohemians and artists and numerous gay men, a group that always surrounded Moyna and whose company she adored. "I was around a lot of gay men," Angela said. "My mother knew a ton of them. It was astonishing how many actors, older actors, were gay." New York in the 1940s was an epicenter of art and culture and theater, and Angela dreamed of making it there as a star, possibly on Broadway. But the reality was not so glamorous for her. They had few connections or job prospects. For a time, Moyna and Angela supported the family by performing scenes from Shakespeare at local schools for $25 a show. Angela, who was now 16 years old, looked after her brothers during the day, and by night, she found work in nightclubs by claiming to be several years older. The 2 years that they spent in New York were rough, but it wouldn't be the last time that Angela would have to figure out how to start from scratch and reinvent herself. After struggling in New York for 2 years, Moyna thought there might be work for her in movies, so in 1942, she moved the family to Los Angeles. Angela, now 17, arrived with $20 to her name. As within New York, the family found a home near one of the city's gay enclaves and started looking for work. At first, Angela and Moyna both worked in a department store, and Angela picked up a second job at a local theater that put on gory, horror-themed plays. But they didn't hire her as an actress. Her job was to go up and down the aisles during the shows and give smelling salts to everyone who fainted. Then, a stroke of luck. Through a friend, Angela managed to get an audition at MGM, and she caught the eye of director George Cukor. He was casting a devious, horny maid in the movie Gaslight, which is about a man who's trying to make his wife think that she's losing her mind. And at first, everyone else at the studio thought that Angela was too young for the maid part. But at the audition, she carried herself like an older woman, something she'd have to learn to do to get work in nightclubs in New York.
I can take care of myself when I want to.
She got the part, and when she told her manager at the department store that she was leaving for a better paying job, he offered to match it until she told him that her new job at MGM meant a raise from $27 a week to $500 a week. Being in a movie was a totally new experience for her. Privately, she said, "I didn't know my ass from a hole in the ground," and was still so young that they had to postpone scenes where her character smokes until she hit her 18th birthday. To cover for her inexperience, Angela adopted a cool, confident persona, and it worked. Her co-stars were impressed by how professional this teenager was, and even up against stars Ingrid Bergman and Charles Boyer, she steals the show. For her very first film role, Angela earned an Oscar nomination. And just like that, it seemed like she'd hit the big time. Her dreams of being a star were about to come true. Next, she appeared in the film The Picture of Dorian Gray, based on the Oscar Wilde story about a beautiful man who never grows old because he has a secret portrait that ages in his place. Angela was to play Sybil Vane, a naive young woman who falls in love with Dorian. Sybil was a small-time cabaret singer, just like Angela had been in England.
Goodbye, little yellow bird. I'd rather brave the cold.
And producers cast her because they thought she looked like women in Victorian pornography. Once again, Angela steals the show, and she got another Oscar nomination, and she won a Golden Globe for the role. By now, she was under contract with MGM, and her career was looking brighter than ever. But something was missing. Despite all the positive attention, MGM executives didn't consider her star material and kept casting her in supporting roles instead of leads. They also left her out of the publicity that they gave other actresses. Angela wanted to be a star, but the Hollywood machine seemed to have made up its mind that she would always be a sidekick. But her career seemed like it might get a jump start when she met an actor and artist named Richard Cromwell. Richard had appeared in a couple of silent films, and when he saw her in Picture of Dorian Gray, just like the character in that film, he became infatuated with her. Angela was starstruck. She recognized Richard from the fan magazines that she collected when she was younger. They started dating and quickly got married. She later said she wasn't thinking at all about the ramifications of this fast-paced romance, just that it came her way and she did it because it felt good at the time. She said, "I was a young woman looking for glamour and attention, and I didn't really get it. So what did I do? I got married at 19. At first, the marriage was great. Richard was friends with lots of huge celebrities like Joan Crawford and Cary Grant and Gary Cooper and William Holden, and he introduced his new wife to all of them. But unbeknownst to Angela, the marriage was intensely stressful for Richard because he was a closeted gay man. There were hints. Many of his friends were gay, like Jerry Asher, the head of publicity at Warner Brothers, and tabloids had long printed insinuations about Richard. They couldn't come right out and say that he was gay, so they used coded language, noting how he was known to cry all the time, or that he was a man who admired flowers. But Angela was oblivious to all that. For the time being, she was just happy to bask in the attention. Richard tried to make the relationship work, but after just 9 months, Angela came home one day to find a note reading, "I'm sorry, darling, I can't do this." Heartbroken, Angela blamed herself for the marriage falling apart.
It was like the end of my life.
She was so desperate to know what she might have done wrong that she went to Richard's psychiatrist to ask why he had left. Psychiatrist wouldn't say, he'd only tell her it was 100% not her fault, and that the marriage could never have worked for reasons he couldn't disclose. Angela was confused about that until it suddenly dawned on her that Richard's entire social circle was gay men, and that he'd become obsessed with her after seeing her play a romantic interest for a coded gay character in an Oscar Wilde film. It was like a light bulb just suddenly turned on for her. Looking back on it, she said, "I know that he himself was carried away with this glorious idea that he was marrying Sybil Vane, that I would straighten him out. The desperate part was that I was so in love with him."
It never should have happened. It was something that he, as an individual, really tried to will himself into, but it was not possible because he was a gay man.
That realization started a reconciliation between them. They became friends over the next few years and were close until Richard's death in 1960. Angela later called the marriage a mistake, but a very good lesson. She realized from then on that she'd have to make decisions about her life and her career more carefully, instead of just accepting whatever came her way and hoping for the best. So, realizing that nobody else was going to advocate for her, Angela started pushing MGM to give her better roles. She told them she wanted to be a lead. She said, "I want to play a scene with Clark Gable or Jimmy Stewart in which he breaks down the door and I'm behind it. I want to be the reason he broke down the door." MGM executives said, okay, if she just played a few more background roles, they'd give her something better. She took them at their word, but somehow those better roles just never materialized. Throughout the 40s and into the early 50s, she was only cast as what she later called bitches on wheels and people's mothers. In The Three Musketeers, she played the villainous elderly Queen Anne. In Samson and Delilah, she played a minor Philistine who gets speared to a wall. In the film If Winter Comes, she desperately wanted the glamorous lead, but got cast instead as a character more than 10 years older than her real age, a part that she described as the dowdy bitch. She was still in her 20s, but a New York Times article noted that much of her mail, Miss Lansbury says, is from fans who think she's in her 40s. Even her singing roles were insulting, because even though she had a good singing voice, they kept dubbing her, like in 10th Avenue Angel and Harvey Girls and The Hoodlum Saint. The one time she got to sing for herself was with this utterly bonkers song in Till the Clouds Roll By.
How'd you like to spoon with me?
I'd like to.
And throughout it all, those better roles that MGM executives promised just never came. But there was one bright spot around this time. One weekend, Herb Hatfield, her co-star in Picture of Dorian Gray, invited her to a housewarming party. He had an ulterior motive. He wanted to set her up with a friend, an actor named Peter Shaw. They immediately fell for each other, they started dating, and eventually, after plenty of time and discussion and making sure they weren't rushing into it this time, they got married. She soon had 2 kids, Anthony and Deirdre. Angela found that she loved being a mother, but they desperately needed money. As an actor, Peter wasn't getting much work, and he was transitioning to working as an agent, but their salaries together could just barely support the family. Angela had finally managed to get her personal life into a shape that made her happy, but her professional life still needed a lot of work. The final insult came when MGM finally started featuring her in publicity materials. But their angle was that Angela was Hollywood's glad girl. Glad she isn't pretty or beautiful. Glad she has had to work for a living. That was the last straw. In 1952, Angela left MGM, figuring that she couldn't do any worse as an independent actor. But she was working against a decade of typecasting, and still couldn't find leads. There were some truly terrible films during this period, like The Purple Mask, what she called a new all-time low point. That one featured Tony Curtis as a sort of French Lone Ranger, but with a Brooklyn accent for some reason.
If ever I can show my gratitude, someday soon, Countess Schobach, when this reign of terror is over, and a Frenchman is again safe on the soil of France.
Then she had an even worse experience on a film called Please Murder Me, which was filmed almost entirely in a supermarket because it was so cheap. These roles paid so poorly that after the last day of shooting on Please Murder Me, Angela drove straight to a welfare office to get on government assistance. The one solid role during this time was in The Manchurian Candidate in 1962, where she got some very intense, intimate acting moments. She got another Golden Globe for the role, but she was again playing an older woman in a supporting role instead of the lead, and it still wasn't the kind of work that she wanted. It was an incredibly frustrating time. She knew that she could act. She advocated tirelessly for herself, but nobody in Hollywood would give her the chance to prove herself. But then she got an unexpected opportunity to return to the place where her career began, the stage. A letter arrived one day from Arthur Lawrence, a playwright from New York who'd written the book for West Side Story. The letter said, "Would you be interested in appearing in a musical on Broadway? Stephen Sondheim is writing the music and lyrics, I'm writing the book." The show was called Anyone Could Whistle. It was created by 2 of the most exciting talents on Broadway. The opportunity of a lifetime. She was ecstatic. Angela packed up and left LA right away. "As far as the movies are concerned, I've had it," she said. "I always fancied I had a sexy singing voice, but no one would ever let me use it." She dove into rehearsals in New York. The show was extremely challenging and nearly ruined her voice, but she pushed herself harder than she ever had before. Sondheim and Lawrence turned out to be a great fit for her as collaborators, and she was very comfortable working with them. Arthur Lawrence in particular had similar politics to those of her family. Like her father, he had ties to communism as a member of a Marxist study group, and he had been blacklisted for years. But there were some bad omens over the show. Early in the run, one of the theater bathrooms caught on fire. One of the lead actors, Henry Lescaut, had a heart attack on stage and died soon after. A dancer fell into the orchestra pit and landed on a saxophonist who had a heart attack and died. Worst of all, audiences hated it. When the curtain went down after the first show, Angela could hear the audience shouting, "Disgraceful" and "Bullshit." It closed after just a handful of shows. And with that, Angela's Broadway dreams were over. Or were they? There's a line in Anything Can Whistle that goes, "This time a ripple, next time a wave," and the wave was about to hit. Angela flew back to LA feeling defeated and didn't sing again for a year. But then she heard about a new musical seeking a lead. The show was Mame, about a larger-than-life woman who charges through life totally unafraid, never letting anyone get in her way. Angela desperately wanted that part, and she paid for her own flight out to New York to audition. Producers listened to her sing and made up their minds. They thought she was awful, that her voice was weak, she was too old. Back she went to LA. But she wasn't ready to give up. She started taking intensive voice lessons, and she reached out to her brother, who was now the producer of the show The Man from U.N.C.L.E., and arranged for him to cast her in a role that was just like the one in Mame, to prove that she could do it.
But always I'm on safari, or I'm making submarine movie, or I'm on hunting trip in Gobi Desert.
That appearance and those lessons got her a second audition for Mame. This time, she met with Mame's lyricist, Jerry Herman. Jerry loved her, and as a favor, he slipped her the sheet music for a song from the show, something no other actress had been able to audition with. After this second audition, the producers were a little warmer to her, but the director, Gene Saks, wanted someone else for the lead, his wife, a former Marine named B. Arthur. Struggling to choose between the two, the producers made Angela audition a third time. She was getting tired, and she called them the next day, exasperated, and said, "I'm going back to California unless you tell me yes or no. I want an answer. I must know before I leave New York, because I'm not coming back." A few hours later, they gave her the part. B got the best friend role. It was the hardest Angela had ever fought for a job, and it finally paid off with a lead. Mame was an exhausting show. There were 9 songs to learn and tons of dances. It was the most challenging role she'd ever had, but she told herself, "I survived the London Blitz. Quite possibly, I can survive this."
Nobody knows what actresses go through to become great international stars of screen, radio, television, etc.
Mame opened on May 24th, 1966, and from the moment that she descended the stairs, it was a smash hit. Critic Rex Reed was at the opening night and described the audience reaction. When people got tired of whistling and clapping like thunder, they stood up and screamed. As the brassy, indomitable Mame, Angela had proved everybody wrong. The MGM execs who thought that she belonged in bit parts, the producers who thought she was too old or that she didn't have the range. For the first time, Angela had become a star through a mix of hard work, determination, and insisting that people give her a chance. But while she was so focused on her career, she didn't realize that back in California, her family was in terrible danger. As Angela's career finally took off, there was a cloud hanging over her children's lives. Her kids, now teens, were falling in with a bad crowd. By the time her son Anthony was 15, he was using cocaine and heroin, and 2 of his friends had died of overdoses. Her daughter Deirdre was also using drugs and befriended a group of hippies living on a nearby ranch. Angela could tell there was something off about that group, and particularly about their leader, a drifter named Charles Manson. Frantic to get them away from the bad influences, Angela flew the kids out to New York to live with her while she was on Broadway. She sent Anthony to a drug treatment center and got Deirdre away from the Manson family just before their murder spree began. But it wasn't enough. Despite their mother's efforts, the kids had difficulty kicking their drug habits. Exhausted, Angela stepped away from Mame and moved everyone back home to LA to spend more time with them. During the day, she worked on a Disney film, Bedknobs and Broomsticks.
Sound the advance!
In that one, she plays a witch who looks after children sent to live in the countryside to escape the Nazi bombing of London, a situation that harkens back to her own real-life experiences. Here are the kids from the film, reuniting decades later and remembering the influence that Angela had on them.
And Angela sort of set the tone, very much an inspiration for me. I remember thinking
And very much our mother.
And at first, it was good to be back home with family around her and to be a good influence on everybody around her. But then, disaster struck. One day in September of 1970, as she was driving home with her husband, she saw a brush fire in the hills near their home. Firefighters were already there and stopped her from getting any closer. So she and her husband drove up the side road and climbed the hills to the house. She rushed inside and grabbed whatever she could, documents, art, their cat named Nosy, and she got out just in time to join up with her husband, Anthony, and Deirdre at the bottom of the hill. There, they watched the fire rush over their home and completely burn it to the ground. Nothing was left. Once again, Angela was going to have to rebuild. Then came the worst setback yet. Anthony overdosed on heroin and wound up in a coma. It was a nightmare, and for Angela, none of her recent career success meant anything compared to keeping her family whole. That was now what she knew she had to fight for. She knew something big needed to change, so she packed up what she had and she flew to Ireland, to the little town that her mother was from. She found a remote farmhouse in the country, bought it, and brought the whole family out to join her. Anthony was in such bad shape that he had to be brought off the plane on a stretcher. But there in the countryside, where forebears had lived, Angela and her husband Peter dedicated themselves completely to giving their kids what they needed to rebuild their lives. They secured intensive drug treatment, brought books in for them to read, and once they were improving, kept the kids busy with repairs to the new home. For the next year, Angela turned down all job offers and focused exclusively on helping her kids get their lives back together. As far as acting was concerned, she said, "I was quite prepared to stop. I seriously believed I would never go back to work again." She was ready to sacrifice everything she'd worked for in order to protect her family. And it worked. Anthony and Deirdre kicked the drugs for good this time, and eventually, Angela felt that it might be time for her to consider the job offers that were still coming her way. There was one in particular that many people were pushing her to pursue, Mama Rose in a revival of Gypsy. The role was a powerful woman who pushes her kids to succeed while neglecting her own needs, and it had been originated on Broadway a few years earlier by Ethel Merman. When the producers of Gypsy approached Angela, she turned them down because she didn't think she could possibly measure up to Ethel Merman. She mentioned that to her friend, the critic Rex Reed, and he blew up. "Are you nuts?" he said. The musical was going to open in London, where audiences had never seen Ethel Merman. And it was a chance to work with her old friends Stephen Sondheim and Arthur Lawrence again. So she reconsidered. She said she'd take the part if they also gave her son Anthony a job on the production as a dialect coach. They agreed, and rehearsals began. On opening night, it was Anthony who pulled the rope to raise the curtain for his mother's return to the stage. Gypsy was another challenging show, culminating in one of the most raw, emotional scenes in musical theater, when Mama Rose has a breakdown and sings about everything that she sacrificed.
Well, someone tell me, when is it my turn? Don't I get a dream for myself? Starting now, it's gotta be my turn. Gangway world, get off of my runway.
Angela was incredible. On opening night, she got a 15-minute standing ovation. The show was a hit. Angela was back. It was a great opportunity for Anthony, too. He said, "It gave me enough of a sense of self-worth that I entered drama school." Finally, her professional life and her family life, both of which she'd fought so hard for, were both thriving together. Angela toured with Gypsy for the next 2 years, taking it from London to Chicago to Broadway. It was like a nationwide victory tour. And by the way, during this time, she found out that one of the guys in the chorus was single and helped him find a date at a gay bar. If you want more about that story, I've got the details on my Patreon. That's at patreon.com/mattbaum. Gypsy was followed by a decade of work in theater and one-off roles in TV and film. On stage, she reunited with Sondheim for Sweeney Todd, a gory musical about a barber who kills people and a woman who bakes the corpses into pies. She was hesitant about that role at first because she was concerned it was a step back to supporting roles rather than starring. But Stephen Sondheim came to her home, saying worst pies in London for her, and she was in, on the condition that she got to do some comedy. So he wrote the song Have a Little Priest, which turned out to be one of the highlights of the show.
Have a little priest.
Is it really good?
Sir, it's too good, at least.
Angela had a blast in this role, and you can see how much fun she's having. It harkened back to the style of bawdy stage shows that she enjoyed as a little girl, and she loved playing around on stage. She used to throw bits of pie at the conductor during the show. One night, the audience wasn't reacting enough, so Angela molded the dough into male genitalia and dangled it over the edge of the table, letting gravity pull it down slowly toward the floor. She and her co-star George Hearn would tease each other by passing gas at one another during the show. Angela also popped up in a few movies and TV shows around this time, many of them mysteries. In 1978, she did a movie version of Death on the Nile, where she plays a mystery novelist.
I am here to absorb local color for my grand opus, Snow on the Sphinx's Face.
Then she did A Talent for Murder, where she plays a mystery writer again.
Well, I like the image of the helpless old woman, everybody dancing attendance and kissing her behind.
She did a remake of the Hitchcock film The Lady Vanishes.
That woman is wearing my clothes.
And a Miss Marple mystery called The Mirror Cracked.
The world of the cinema, the village, it's all quite the same, really.
She also got into animation, voicing Mommy Fortuna in The Last Unicorn.
Let me go.
I quit show business first.
None of these projects was particularly successful, but they foreshadowed the roles that would take her from a star and make her into an icon. Around the early 1980s, Angela was considering doing a TV series. She said, "A small number of people have seen me on the stage. I'm interested in reaching everybody. I don't want to reach just the people who can pay $45 or $50 for a theater ticket." And as luck would have it, she got 2 unexpected job offers at the same time. One was for a Norman Lear sitcom. Norman Lear was huge at this time, one of the top TV creators. Any project with him seemed like it was going to be a sure hit. The other offer was for a weird little mystery show, which seemed like a long shot. It was about a retired English teacher who solves murders.
This is my latest book. My name, I think you know, J.B. Fletcher.
Everyone told Angela, take the sitcom. But Angela found the project called Murder, She Wrote intriguing. She loved the character, an older woman, thoughtful, kind, and still sexy.
Jessica Fletcher, there was something about it that I found very attractive, and I thought, I can do something with this.
Over everyone's advice, she turned down Norman Lear, and that project wound up going to her old friend, B. Arthur, and it never made it past the pilot. Murder, She Wrote, on the other hand, was a huge success. The pilot was the #1 in its time slot. It got great ratings for its first season. The second season, it went up against Steven Spielberg's show Amazing Stories, and beat it every single week. Angela was nominated for Outstanding Lead Actress every year Murder, She Wrote was on the air. Part of the success for the show came from how much Angela identified with the main character, Jessica Fletcher. Jessica was pretty similar to her, strong-willed, hardworking, and always family-oriented.
Hello, cousin.
Angela was playing a role, but there was a lot of the real her on screen too. And over the years, the show played with elements from Angela's real life. They reprised some of the songs that made her famous, like Goodbye Little Yellow Bird.
The snow was very plentiful, and crumbs were very few.
And How'd You Like to Spoon with Me?
How'd you like to spoon with me?
They gave her a cousin named Emma McGill in tribute to her mother, Moyna McGill. Even the production logo at the end of the show has a little in-joke reference. It includes notes from her signature song in Mame. And a lot of the show is just plain fun. From her odd familiarity with party drugs,
If I'm not mistaken, it contained amyl nitrate.
to the time she goes to a drag bar,
Have you noticed there's something a little strange about this place?
I can explain everything.
to her experiments with virtual reality.
Welcome to Hastings Rock.
Oh, Jeremy Hastings is perfect.
From its very first episode, Murder, She Wrote brought her to millions of people and made her a huge star, the dream that she'd had her whole life.
What an unexpected pleasure. I have spent many happy hours between the covers of your books.
And she didn't keep her good fortune to herself. She shared it with others, like her son Anthony, whose life she saved and who now, after graduating from drama school, started working in the TV industry and became a director on Murder, She Wrote. She also used the show to help her fellow actors. When the actress Madeleine Roux was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, she found it hard to get enough work to qualify for Screen Actors Guild insurance. So Angela not only arranged to have Madeleine appear on the show so that she could keep her health coverage, she had them build guardrails and ramps so Madeleine could more easily get around the set. Angela also arranged to hire many of the actors she'd worked with back in the old MGM days, many of whom couldn't always find reliable work in their later years. Hurd Hatfield from Picture of Dorian Gray was on multiple times as both a killer and a victim. There's also Janet Leigh, her old classmate Glynis Johns, Roddy McDowell, Leslie Nielsen, Mickey Rooney, both of the Sweeney Todds she'd worked with on stage, George Hearn and Len Cariou. For the 12 years that the show was on, it had nearly 2,000 guest stars. As actress Jane Meadows said, Angela's success with this show has opened the doors to employment of, shall we say, seasoned actresses of my age. Angela also used her high profile to raise money for causes that were important to her. Chief among them was fighting HIV, since it had touched the lives of so many of her close friends. Through the 80s and 90s, she appeared at countless HIV/AIDS fundraisers. When Murder, She Wrote hit its 200th episode, CBS and Universal wanted to throw a huge party, but Angela told them instead to donate $50,000 to AMFAR, the country's leading HIV organization. When she was invited to christen a cruise ship, she did it under the condition that the cruise line donate $1 million to AMFAR. She arranged for CBS to run messages about HIV awareness before episodes of Murder, She Wrote.
You may think you can't get AIDS because you're not in a high-risk group, but risk comes from what you do, not who you are. Get the facts.
Her friend Rex Reed called her a general in the war against AIDS. She also dipped her toe back into animation, voicing Mrs. Potts in Beauty and the Beast. For that film, she worked closely with Howard Ashman, the gay composer who'd created the music for The Little Mermaid and Aladdin and several Broadway shows.
It's a guest, sakes alive, and I'll be blessed.
For 11 years, Murder, She Wrote was a Sunday night institution. But by the mid-90s, CBS was getting worried that it made the network seem old, a critique that Angela had been hearing for nearly 50 years at that point. The network moved the show up to Thursday, putting it against Friends, and ratings plummeted. CBS moved to cancel it the next year. Angela was furious. CBS executives were apologetic about the change, and they asked what they could do to make it up to her. Inwardly, I was seething, she said. But outwardly, she was calm and polite and a clever businesswoman. She told them she wanted them to give her a series of TV specials, and that's exactly what they did. First, some Murder, She Wrote TV movies, and then a project that was very close to her heart. Around the time that Murder, She Wrote ended, she heard that her old friend, Jerry Herman, who'd helped her land her breakthrough role in Mame, was very ill. He was HIV positive, and this was the days before the cocktails that make HIV a manageable condition. When Angela saw him, she realized how dire it was, and her drive to protect people she cared about kicked in. She said, "He doesn't think he's going to live much longer. He needs something. He's crying out, and we can help him." So she arranged for one of her TV specials to be based on his work, a Christmas movie called Mrs. Santa Claus. It was cheerful and upbeat, and set in the time that Angela knew from her childhood. It also weaves in themes that were a part of her life growing up, issues that she watched her father work tirelessly on, like women's suffrage and labor protections. Work on the movie was tough. They were filming in the middle of a summer heat wave in heavy winter clothes. And at one point, Angela attempted a move that a stunt woman was supposed to do, and she nearly killed herself. You can check out my Patreon for that whole story. But those challenges aside, the movie was a huge success. CBS reran it every year, and the best news was that Jerry Herman's health started to improve. He responded well to new treatment and wound up living 20 more years. By the mid-90s, Angela was now firmly cemented as a TV and film icon, beloved by millions. And her career was secure, her family was strong, she could finally take it a little easier. She kept working and mostly took theater roles that were personally meaningful to her or just fun, like Blythe Spirit, for which she got a Tony.
It's all about the body, and it's all about this
Or reuniting with Stephen Sondheim for A Little Night Music, getting another Tony nomination.
I thought, yes, I should do this. My time has come to play this old bird.
And of course, she spent the next 3 decades collecting Lifetime Achievement Awards. She got one from the Tonys, from SAG, from the Oscars. She got a National Medal of the Arts, a Britannia Award, a Kennedy Center Award, a Disney Legend Award. And among all those who recognized her, Angela was particularly treasured by gay men, thanks to all the work that she did to fight HIV. Here she is getting an award from the Gay Men's Chorus, presented by her old friend, Jerry Herman.
She certainly has always been there for us. She was one of the first people in show business to lend her support to gay rights and to AIDS awareness.
In 2013, Angela looked back on all the work she'd done and said she was so proud to have become a gay icon. After nearly a century-long career, Angela passed away earlier this year in her sleep, a few days shy of her 98th birthday. The news was met with an outpouring of love. Everyone who knew her, or just watched her on stage and screen, had a story about how much her work meant to them, because she'd worked so hard, for so long, in so many roles, that it's hard to find anybody whose life she hadn't touched, whether close family and friends whose lives she saved, colleagues whose careers she supported, and the millions of strangers who knew her through her characters. And that's just how she would have wanted it. Here she is talking about how she wanted to be remembered.
I'd like to be remembered as somebody who entertained, who took one out of oneself for a few minutes, a few hours, transported you into a different venue, gave you relief, gave you entertainment, and gave you joy and laughter and tears, all those things. I would like to be remembered as somebody who is capable of doing that.
This is all just a small slice of the incredible experiences throughout Dame Angela Lansbury's life. There are so many more I just didn't have room for in the script, like the sexy party trick that she learned in her 20s, her bizarre feud with actor Tony Curtis, and why she initially turned down her role in Beauty and the Beast, and how a couple of kids convinced her to change her mind. I'll have all those stories over on Patreon at patreon.com/mattbaum. Big thanks to everybody who makes these videos possible, and now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a meeting with Quentin Tarantino.
Edith Head told me that he had a foot fetish.